All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. Hemingway's Masculine Literature, a study guide for full-spectrum masculinity, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. Hemingway's Masculine Literature, a field guide for men who still notice reality. The Empress Has No Self. The Accidental Autopsy of Effective Due Diligence and the Void That Wrote It. I once watched a prosecutor construct a case so airtight the defendant's existence constituted evidence of guilt. Breathing, consciousness of guilt, not breathing, concealment. This prosecutor later became a family court judge. The defendant hanged himself in a garage in Toledo. His children were reassigned to the woman who'd falsely accused him of abuse, because as her attorney argued, the children need stability. The coroner ruled it suicide. The system ruled it justice. The children, last I checked, are in therapy. The judge received a commendation from the state bar. I tell you this because what you just read, effective due diligence, is the same machine miniaturized and repackaged as relationship advice. The article is not theory. It is a design for a torture chamber the writer has built inside her own chest and invited you to rent. Let us perform the minimal courtesy of taking this woman at her word. She says, the test is designed to be unpassable. She says, there is nothing solid enough inside me to not need testing. She says, without the crisis, I am no one. She says, I have never made a decision in my life. She says, peace is the thing I fear more than chaos. She says she wears a bag to bed, a literal bag, strapped across her body because stillness is unbearable. She has confessed in 1,700 words of artisanal prose to acedia. The ancients knew this vice, not sadness, but the absence of anything capable of sadness, not pain, but the void where a soul should maintain residence. She has published her diagnosis in a journal, and her colleagues applauded because the modern academy cannot distinguish a cry for help from a theoretical contribution. The DPSM-5, the psychiatric manual that actually describes reality, would not applaud. It would reach for the commitment papers. Now watch the architecture collapse under its own weight. She uses reasoned argument, structured prose, propositional claims, a numbered protocol to convince you that reason is a patriarchal weapon. This is not paradox. It is a man using a ladder to climb to a height from which he declares ladders invalid, then wondering why he cannot descend. Her epistemology devours itself. If male reason is control, then her reasoning is control. If explanation is conviction, then her explanation convicts her. She has constructed a fourfold double bind. Calm is suspicion, distress is failure, speech is defense, silence is withholding, and declared this inescapable trap feminist action. A trap with no exit is not genuine action. It is a roach motel decorated with curated cheese boards and feminist theory. The roach enters. The roach cannot leave. The roach is then blamed for his lack of enthusiasm about the decor. I will show you in the pages that follow how this single article contains the seeds of its own refutation, how the Western tradition she never names provides every tool needed to dismantle her temple of noise, and how what she calls due diligence is in fact the precise inversion of every principle that makes knowledge, justice, and love possible. I will use her own words as evidence. I will use formal logic as the scalpel. I will use 2,000 years of accumulated wisdom as the courtroom, and I will demonstrate that what she has mistaken for awakening is the most sophisticated flight from reality ever packaged as self-help. The woman in the bag is not awake. She is asleep in a cage she welded shut from the inside, calling the bar's boundaries and the lock's sovereignty. By the end of this analysis, you will see the cage, you will see the welder, and you will understand why the most dangerous lie a woman can tell is the one she tells herself about herself. With the door locked, the bag strapped on, and the void humming its miney little song in the room where a soul was supposed to live.
Bunkum article by a feminist, PhD. Affective due diligence. Why your peace is a red flag. Peace is the patriarchal sedative. Stay restless. You know what I've learned after 12 years in gender studies, 3 degrees, and 1 beautiful ceremonial unbinding from the illusion of male reason. Peace is the narcotic they dose you with. That stillness he offers. That baby, it's okay, you don't have to fight. That's not love. That's a compliance protocol. That's the soft architecture of control wearing a sweater and asking you to sit down, breathe, and God forbid, let him off the hook. I learned this at university. I learned this at dinner parties. I learned this while wearing a crossbody bag that never left my hip because I never knew when I'd need to leave, which is the whole point, isn't it? The bag, the exit strategy, the hyper-readiness. They call it anxiety. I call it data acquisition. I call it effective due diligence. And I'm done pretending it's a disorder. It's a methodology. The college awakening, or how I learned to stop trusting and love the audit. I was 20. Junior year, there was a boy. There's always a boy, isn't there? Standing in the kitchen of some rented house with PBR in one hand and the absolute audacity of eye contact in the other. He said, "You're really intense, you know that." And just like that, the data arrived. Not from his words. Words are trinkets. The data came from the way he said it, the slight step backward, the recalibration of proximity. He was already drafting his exit narrative and handing me the pen to write it. So I did what any self-respecting woman with a premature copy of The Second Sex and a diagnosed but unprocessed attachment style would do. I escalated. I asked him a question I already knew the answer to. Do you actually like me, or is this just convenient? And then I watched, not his words, his state, his body. The microsecond of hesitation before the "of course I like you." There it is, the hesitation, the crack in the performance. He failed, not because his answer was wrong, but because he answered at all. A man who is certain doesn't explain. He is. And this one explained for 45 minutes on that sticky kitchen floor, while I felt nothing but the sublime electric confirmation that I had been right to suspect him. My therapist later called this self-sabotage. My therapist went to the same patriarchal training academy as him. What I was actually doing was effective due diligence. The systematic, embodied, continuous evaluation of male adequacy under variable emotional conditions. I wasn't destroying the relationship. I was auditing it, and the audit always reveals what the balance sheet hides. Or the dinner party protocol, or social tessening as feminist praxis. We were at Charlotte's exposed brick, curated cheese board, the specific kind of liberal arts couple who met at a co-op and now perform their egalitarianism like dinner theatre. I was there with Marcus, 3 months in. Still in the probationary disclosure window, which is what I call the period where I haven't yet decided whether he's a person or a project. Charlotte's partner, David, said something about grace during a conversation about accountability culture. Something about how maybe people should be allowed to grow. I looked at Marcus. This is the test, not the question I asked. There was no question. The test was the look. The look that says your response to another man's liberal performativity is data about your own capacity for complicity. Marcus felt it. I could see him feel it, the prickle of being observed by a woman who is always observing, always cataloguing, always running background processes on every micro-expression, like a cryptocurrency mining operation, burning through electricity to find one coin of usable truth. He blinked. He swallowed. He said, I see both sides. Failure? Not because both sides is wrong in some abstract moral sense. It's wrong in my sense, the sense that matters, the one that tells me whether this man will hold the line when the audit comes for him. When I need him to not explain, not mediate, not both sides the fact of my existence, but to stand in the storm of my feeling and not flinch. He flinched. They always flinch. I spent the rest of dinner performing warmth while internally drafting the narrative that would, by Sunday morning, make this his fault. He made me uncomfortable. He invalidated me in a social setting. He prioritized male solidarity over emotional safety. By Sunday, I believed it. By Monday, it was true. This is not dishonesty. This is the legitimate retroactive construction of relational reality. My feelings are the evidence. My feelings are the crime scene, and he was there. The crossbody bag was already on my shoulder by the time I left Charlotte's. Not because I was leaving. I stayed for another hour of performance, but because the bag is the emblem, the ever-present exit. The body-level commitment to the possibility that this room, this man, this moment might become unsafe, and I will not be caught without my essentials. Phone, lip balm, and the radical freedom to disappear. They call it paranoia. I call it feminist situational awareness. 3. Affective due diligence, the Thugy. Here is what I've codified after years of field work, which is what I call my dating life when I'm being generous. Affective due diligence, ADD, is the right and responsibility of every woman to continuously evaluate the men in her orbit through escalating emotional scenarios that reveal true capacity. Note, I did not say manipulate. I did not say provoke. I said evaluate. The distinction is everything. And by everything, I mean it is the moat I retreat to when someone, usually a man, usually a therapist, usually a man who is a therapist, suggests that my behavior follows a pattern. I don't have a pattern. I have a protocol. And the protocol is this: data acquisition through crisis, not manufactured crisis, revealed crisis. The crisis was always there. His inadequacy was always there. My role is simply to create the conditions where it becomes visible. I'm not the weather. I am the weather report. State of delivery as evidence. It's not what he says, it's the state he's in when he says it. A man who is calm while you're drowning isn't regulated, he's unaffected. A man who panics isn't unstable, he's present. The degree of his distress is the measure of his investment. Explanation as conviction. If he can articulate why he loves you, he doesn't. He's rationalizing. Love that can be explained is love that can be revoked. The correct answer to why do you love me is not a list. It is distress. It is the inability to answer. It is the crack in his voice that says, I don't know, I just do. Please stop asking. You're scaring me. Calm as suspicion. Peace is not the presence of safety. It is the absence of data. A quiet man is a man with something to hide. A satisfied woman is a woman who has stopped paying attention. I will not be satisfied. Satisfaction is surrender. The continuous audit, there is no pass, there is only has not yet failed. The test is infinite because the risk is infinite. To stop testing is to trust, and to trust is to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable is to be destroyed. You see the elegance. The test is designed to be unpassable, and that is not a flaw in the design, that is the design. Because a passable test yields certainty, and certainty is the death of vigilance, and vigilance is the only thing standing between me and the void where myself should be. I don't test because I'm broken. I test because there is nothing solid enough inside me to not need testing. The test is the scaffolding, the man is the load-bearing wall. And if he buckles, and he will, because scaffolding is not meant to be permanent, I will not be blamed for the collapse. I will say the materials were faulty. I will never say, I chose the wrong building method. I will never say, maybe the problem is that I'm trying to live inside a construction site. IV. The look. Here's what I've institutionalized, what every woman in my coven, every student in my seminars, every follower in my algorithmically curated sphere of influence has internalized. If he speaks, he's explaining. If he's explaining, he's defending. If he's defending, he's guilty. This is not a fallacy. This is epistemic hygiene. The man who says, "I love you," without prompting, performing, seeking validation, weak. The man who says, "I love you," after being asked, complying, reactive, following. The man who says nothing, withholding, controlling through silence, dangerous. You see the architecture. There is no correct response because the correct response does not exist. The test is a locked room, and I'm not the jailer. I'm the interior designer. I made this room beautiful. I made it feel like home. I put candles in it and called it intimacy. And when he can't find the door, because there is no door, I will say, "Why are you trying to leave?" This is the double bind as decor. The L1 is open up to me. The L2 is your vulnerability disgusts me. The L3, the metalock, the seal is, if you name this, you're gaslighting me. He cannot win. He cannot leave. He cannot name the game. And the beauty, the sublime feminist beauty, is that I don't have to know I'm playing it. The protocol runs in the background. The schema executes without my conscious consent. I feel it as intuition. I call it my truth. And my truth is waterproof, childproof, and immune to interrogation. By the time he tries to name the pattern, I've already reframed it. You're invalidating my feelings. You're pathologizing my reactions. You're doing the exact thing I'm asking you not to do. Checkmate. The auditee cannot audit the auditor. V. The irresponsibility imperative. Or, how I made agency someone else's problem. Here is the deepest secret of my methodology. And I share it not because I've transcended it. I haven't. I won't. I can't. Because transcendence requires the very integrated self that my psychic architecture was designed to prevent. But because the sharing is the performance, and the performance is the self. I have never made a decision in my life. Not really. Not in the way that counts. Not in the way where I hold the outcome inside myself and say, this, I chose this, I am the author. Every choice I've made has been extracted. By circumstances, by men, by the patriarchy, by the economy, by the lingering ghosts of every attachment figure who looked at me wrong when I was 7 and taught me that love is a question that never gets a right answer. I didn't choose to abort. The situation chose. I didn't choose to leave. His failure chose. I didn't choose to escalate. The data demanded it. This is not avoidance. This is okay. It is avoidance, but it's avoidance with theoretical backing. It's avoidance with a bibliography. It's avoidance that I've presented at 3 conferences and been applauded for, because in the language of my discipline, the refusal of agency is not weakness. It is the dismantling of neoliberal subjectivity. I don't avoid responsibility. I deconstruct it. And if you deconstruct responsibility thoroughly enough, into power structures, into discourse, into the spectral hauntologies of patriarchal genealogy, it ceases to exist as something that can be personally held. It becomes structural, and structures don't feel guilt. Structures don't wake up at 3 a.m. with the vague, terrible sense that you have hollowed out every room you've ever entered and called it renovation. Structures don't feel anything. That's the feature, not the bug. Vi, the crossbody manifesto. It's a leather crossbody, chestnut, brass hardware, just large enough for what matters. I wear it everywhere, to lectures, to parties, to bed, on the nights when the silence gets too loud, and I need the weight of it on my ribs to remember where I end. It holds my phone, exit strategy, documentation device, tether to the coven. My keys, literal escape, the right to leave at any moment, mobility as ontology. A compact surveillance, I see you seeing me. A pen, I'm always writing the narrative, even when I'm not writing. Nothing that belongs to anyone else. This bag never leaves my body. Not at dinner parties, not on dates. Not in the apartments of men who have said stay and meant stay and watched me smile and reach for my bag in a single fluid motion that I have practiced so many times it no longer requires thought. The bag is not paranoia. The bag is ontology. It says, I am a person who may need to leave at any moment. I am a person for whom staying is a continuous, renewable decision that can be revoked. I am a person who has never once in her life been in a room she couldn't exit. The bag is the physical instantiation of effective due diligence. It is the audit made accessory. It is the refusal to arrive fully, because to arrive fully is to be present, and to be present is to be available, and to be available is to be accountable. And to be accountable is to admit that sometimes, maybe even often, the problem in the room is not the man, not the patriarchy, not the structural violence of late capitalism, but the woman wearing the bag. And that admission is the one data point my protocol cannot process. That admission is the exception that crashes the system. That admission is the calm I have spent my entire life fleeing, because calm, for a woman like me, a woman with a feral maternal instinct curled around a void where children should be, a woman who has made her womb a crime scene and called it liberation, a woman whose love is a cross-examination and whose desire is an indictment. Calm is the thing I fear more than chaos, because in calm there is nothing to audit. In calm there is only me, and me, without the test, without the crisis, without the delicious, terrible urgency of the next data request. Is no one. The slogan, or the closing argument. I will not ask you to heal. Healing is the language of the oppressor. It assumes you are broken. I will not ask you to trust. Trust is the surrender of vigilance. I will not ask you to be reasonable, because reason is the tool they use to talk you out of what you know. I will ask you this. Stay restless. Stay hungry for data. stay committed to the audit. Stay in the kitchen with the PBR and the question you already know the answer to. Stay at the dinner party with the look that says, I am watching. Stay in the crossbody bag, ready to leave, always ready to leave, because leaving is the only power you've ever trusted. And when he inevitably asks, with that cracked voice and those desperate eyes, what do you want from me? Don't answer. The question is the answer. His inability to satisfy it is the proof that the audit was necessary. His distress is your data. His confusion is your confirmation. His love, real, flawed, trying, failing, is the raw material you will process into evidence and then when the verdict comes, discard. Not because you're cruel, because the protocol requires it. Because peace is the patriarchal sedative, and you, brilliant, insatiable, unsatisfied, you are awake. Dr. Winona Feminist Marxist, PhD, is Professor of Gender Studies at the University of Perpetual Grievance, High Coven member of the Satanic Church of Structural Critique, and author of The Audited Heart. Why Love is a Compliance Mechanism, and other essays I wrote instead of going to therapy. She lives alone and calls it sovereignty. Her crossbody bag is from Maddywell. Peace is a patriarchal sedative, stay restless, effective due diligence, the audit never ends. The epistemology of entropy, how effective due diligence refutes itself through its own logic. You want to know what real tyranny looks like? Read the confession of a modern gender studies professor bragging about her effective due diligence and understand that you are staring directly into the abyss of a damaged soul. She tells you peace is a patriarchal sedative and demands you stay restless. But let us fix the grammar first, because the war begins in the dictionary. Look at the word peace. It descends to us from the Latin pax, which traces back to the Indo-European root pag, meaning to fasten, to make firm, to bind together in a covenant. Peace is not a narcotic stupor. It is the structural integrity of a civilization. The binding agreement that allows men to build families, kingdoms, and cathedrals without looking over their shoulders. Now look at her weaponized phrase, due diligence. It stems from diligentia, meaning carefulness, and diligere, to single out, to love and value rightly based on true knowledge. She has taken a fiduciary, legal standard designed to ensure objective fairness and weaponized it into a license for perpetual emotional inquisition. She equivocates the term, substituting carefulness with suspicion, attempting to sanitize her own paranoia with the language of corporate law. What she is actually describing is not an audit, it is the systematic destruction of due process, the bedrock of Western justice hard-won from the blood of our ancestors at Runnymede. Due process, the sine qua non of a free republic, demands notice of charges, an opportunity to respond, an impartial adjudicator, fixed standards of evidence, and the finality of judgment. Look closely at her protocol and witness the exact architectural design of the Star Chamber. Her charges are secret, communicated via the look across a dinner party. The standards of adequacy are unwritten and unachievable. She acts as the prosecutor, the witness, and the judge. There is no finality because, as she explicitly confesses, the test is infinite. She is not advancing justice. She is enacting the witch trial, the show trial, the Soviet purge where the execution follows the crime of simply existing. She has built an inquisition without the cross, a court without the law. You sit there wondering how she escapes the consequences of this clinical madness, with the explanation being a psychological cloaking device called gamma bias. This mental framework runs on the unshakable assumption that women are inherently wonderful, compounded by an empathy gap making male suffering entirely unseen, and upheld by the routine, uncheckly presumption of female victimhood. The impact of this prejudice exceeds all other recorded social biases, mainly because society applies zero corrective pressure against it. Her whole manifesto functions within this impenetrable bubble of partiality. When she shatters a quiet evening using fabricated hysteria, her emotional turbulence is praised as methodology, Yet when the man stays calm, his stability is labeled as suspicion. When she invents a narrative in her mind during a Sunday drive home, it is accepted as legitimate retroactive construction of relational reality. But if he risks expressing his love, he is accused of performing and consequently deemed weak. Every unequal judgment automatically benefits the female subject and punishes the male object, while she disguises this clinical disparity beneath the holy banner of feminist justice. She remains blind to the prejudice because the prejudice is the exact lens through which she observes the world. Watch her play her word games, specifically her use of the Mott and Bailey fallacy. She builds a heavily fortified, uncontroversial keep, the Mott by stating, "I did not say manipulate, I said evaluate," framing it merely as a woman's right to assess character. But she doesn't live in the keep. She rides out to pillage the Bailey, which is a landscape of manufactured emotional crises, deliberate escalation, and retroactive narrative fabrication designed to trap men in unwinnable arguments. She confesses to the Bailey in broad daylight, admitting that the test is designed to be unpassable and that this unpassability is not a flaw, but the central feature of her design. She retreats to the Mott of evaluation when a therapist or a man catches on, only to sprint back to the Bailey of outright psychological abuse the moment the pressure drops. Let her speak plainly about her logic, or rather the total absence of it. She employs reasoned argument, structured prose, and propositional claims to convince us that reason itself is a patriarchal weapon. She is wielding logos to assassinate logos. Let us lay out the syllogism of her self-destruction. Premise 1, all claims require the faculty of reason to be intelligible. Premise 2, she makes intelligible claims. Conclusion, she relies on reason. Now add her ideological poison. Premise 3, she claims reason is a patriarchal tool of control. Conclusion, her own argument is an instrument of patriarchal control by her very own definition. Her epistemology does not stand on a paradox, it is a suicide vest. She uses the scientific method of rational inquiry to blow up rational inquiry. Observe how she births her own reality from the void. She brags about fabricating grievances, writing that by Sunday she believed her lies, and by Monday they were true. This is a confession of solipsistic reality generation, a dark magic where she does not discover facts. She legislates them through her feelings. Trace this epistemic tyranny to its postmodern roots, where power dictates truth and words mean whatever the ruling class needs them to mean. Her epistemology reduces to one base axiom: my feelings create reality, and your reality is oppression. If feelings are infallible evidence, then the man's feeling of love must be equally valid. Yet she instantly dismisses his distress as a crack in the performance. This asymmetry exposes the true engine of her ideology. Only female feelings count as empirical data. This is not science, it is theocratic fiat, a dictatorship of the hysterical. Now we reach the terminal proof, the self-refuting syllogism of effective due diligence itself. Premise 1, she claims her system reveals truth about men through continuous testing. Premise 2, she admits the test is designed to be unpassable. Premise 3, she confesses she has never made a decision in her life and possesses nothing solid enough inside me to not need testing. Conclusion, a broken instrument wielded by an individual who confesses to having no integrated self, using tests deliberately engineered to yield failure, cannot produce objective truth about the subject. It can only project the tester's internal void onto the man. The microscope is cracked, the slide is poisoned, and the data is pure noise. The audit is a sham. We must contrast her architecture of madness with the Western canon she blindly attacks. Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics defines virtue as a habituated mean, requiring stable character assessment over years of observation, not a snapshot taken during a manipulated, emotional crisis. Aquinas taught that moral acts require a harmony of object, intent, and circumstances, not merely the fleeting tyranny of a woman's mood. The common law tradition screams audi alterum partem, hear the other side. while the scientific method demands disconfirmation, not the endless, desperate confirmation of her own victimhood. She has set fire to 2,000 years of epistemic architecture, the very traditions that dragged humanity out of the mud, and she calls the ashes awakening. Finally, look at her four-part protocol: crisis as data, state of delivery as evidence, explanation as conviction, calm as suspicion, and witness a closed hermeneutic circle completely immune to disconfirmation. If a man is calm, he is suspect and hiding data. If he is distressed, he is failing under the pressure of the audit. If he speaks, he is explaining, which means he is defending, which means he is guilty. If he is silent, he is withholding and controlling. This is a fourfold double bind with no exit. By Karl Popper's demarcation criterion, a framework that cannot be falsified is not knowledge, it is cult dogma. It is the logic of the inquisitor. Evidence of guilt proves guilt, and a lack of evidence proves the guilt is brilliantly concealed. She demands you stay restless, because the moment the chaos stops, the moment the room goes quiet, she is forced to face the terrifying emptiness of her own soul, stripped of her crossbody bag, her coven, and her alibis, utterly alone in the silent, unforgiving presence of the truth. The frameworks are dismantled. The syllogisms have done their work. What remains is not argument but diagnosis, and the patient in her autoclave of confessional prose has already written her own chart. Every word she offers as liberation is an admission of captivity. Every protocol she names as protection is a confession of the terror she cannot govern. You do not need my interpellation to see the wreckage. You need only read her twice, once for the performance, once for the autopsy. And so we turn from what her theory refutes in itself to what her soul reveals in its own language, unguarded in the dark, where the bag never leaves her shoulder and the silence she flees is the only honest witness left. The architecture of the void, what effective due diligence confesses about the female psyche. I once watched a man build a house with his hands. Oak beams, mortise and tenon joints, a roof that would hold against northern winters for 200 years. He did not audit the wood. He did not escalate toward the grain to see if it would buckle. He selected, shaped, and trusted, and the structure stands because his judgment was rooted in something real. Now consider the woman who tells you peace is a patriarchal sedative, that stillness is control, that a man who remains calm while she drowns is unaffected rather than anchored. She has announced with the enthusiasm of a child who has discovered matches that her inability to sit in silence is not pathology but philosophy. Let us take her at her word, for her word convicts her more thoroughly than any external indictment ever could. Read her confession with grammar fixed. Acedia, from the Latin acedia and before that the Greek acedia, signifies not sadness but the absence of care, the soul's refusal to inhabit its own existence. She writes, without apparent irony, "There is nothing solid enough inside me to not need testing." This is not vulnerability, this is the diagnostic criterion for an unlived interior. Erikson identified the primary goal of adolescence as identity versus role confusion, the formation of a stable self capable of navigating the world without constant external mirroring. She has failed this challenge, confessed to failing it, and then theorized her failure as epistemological virtue. The scaffolding she describes, the continuous audit, the infinite test, is not a methodology. It is the structural support for a building that was never constructed. She mistakes the crane for the cathedral. Her moral architecture matches her psychic architecture. Kohlberg Stage 3, the good girl ceiling, where morality reduces to interpersonal approval, nice versus mean, acceptance versus rejection, no principled reasoning about justice toward others as autonomous beings. Watch her operation at the dinner party. Marcus says, "I see both sides," and she records failure, not because his position is analytically wrong, but because it fails to demonstrate compliance with her emotional state. His cognition is irrelevant, only his submission registers. This is not ethics. This is the toddler's moral universe. Will you comfort me or won't you? Dressed in academic language and presented at conferences, where similarly arrested souls applaud the performance because they recognize their own reflection and mistake it for depth. She has written a BPD autobiography and submitted it to a journal called Feminism. The profession applauded. The woman deteriorated. The disorder celebrated itself as ideology. Borderline personality organization is characterized by Manichaean splitting. Men are either certain or failing, no gradient, and she provides the textbook illustration. The 3-month probationary disclosure window, followed by inevitable discard. Idol, then iconoclasm, the ancient pattern where the beloved is first elevated to divine status and then demolished for the crime of being finite. The boy in the kitchen with the PBR fails not because his answer is wrong, but because he answered at all. A man who is certain doesn't explain, he is. This is not insight. This is the logic of the suicide. The demand that another human being fill a void that only God can fill, and the rage when the human proves merely human. Consider what she has done to love. Eros, in the Western tradition from Plato's Symposium through the troubadours to the Christian sacrament of marriage, is the ascent of the soul toward the beautiful and the good through mutual self-gift. It requires vulnerability, trust, and the courage to be known. She has replaced Eros with interrogation. The beloved is not a person but a project or a person. Her mocking quotation marks, her degradation of another's being into material for her audit. Love is not given, it is extracted under duress. She has built not a relationship but a locked room, decorated it with candles, called it intimacy, and then blamed the prisoner for failing to enjoy his cell. There is no door because a door would require her to admit she is the architect of her own suffering. The crossbody bag she describes with such devotion, never leaving her body, worn to bed, containing nothing belonging to anyone else, is not feminist practice. It is Winnicott's transitional object, calcified into an adult personality. The toddler carries the blanket everywhere because it provides the illusion of continuity in a world that threatens to dissolve when mother leaves the room. This woman carries the bag for the same reason. It provides the illusion that she can always leave, that staying is a continuous, renewable decision, that she has never once been a room she couldn't exit. But the arithmetic of the bag is merciless. To wear it always is to never arrive. To never arrive is to never be present. To never be present is to never be known, and she blames men for not knowing her. The bag is not sovereignty. The bag is the cage she built for herself, polished to a shine, and called liberation. I have never made a decision in my life. She writes this as revelation. It is confession. I didn't choose to abort, the situation chose. I don't avoid responsibility, I deconstruct it. Here we reach the core. Agency requires an agent, a unified self capable of owning outcomes. She lacks that self. Rather than pursuing integration, which would require the stillness she fears, she has constructed an elaborate philosophical apparatus to justify the lack. Post-structuralism becomes the language of the dog ate my agency. Derrida becomes the patron saint of I didn't do it, discourse did. She has not deconstructed responsibility, she has fled from it in academic robes. The 3 conferences that applauded her could have been 12. The applause changes nothing about the void it celebrates. The death drive manifests in plain text. A feral maternal instinct curled around a void where children should be, a woman who has made her womb a crime scene and called it liberation. Read the etymology. Liberation, from Latin libera, to set free. She has set herself free from the future. Civilization exists because men and women together chose to subordinate present appetite to future generation, to build, plant, nurture, sacrifice for what outlasts them. She has named this sacrifice patriarchy and declared herself emancipated from meaning itself. The approximately 73 million abortions performed globally since ideological movements began reclassifying biological reality as oppression. These are not political acts, they are evolutionary dead ends made philosophy. She demands applause for the applause she gives herself, and the void gives nothing back because the void is nothing. Peace is the patriarchal sedative. Stay restless. This is not a slogan. This is an attack on the highest faculty of the human soul. From Aristotle's theoria, contemplation as the highest human activity, through Augustine's interior habitatio, the inner dwelling of peace, where the soul encounters the divine, to Aquinas' understanding of pax as the tranquility of order within and without, the Western tradition holds that peace is not absence, but presence. Peace is where the soul meets reality without the distortion of appetite. She wages war on peace because peace is where her void becomes visible to herself. Her restlessness is not vigilance, it is flight, and she has been running so long she has mistaken the wind in her ears for wisdom. The remedy is what she cannot name, because naming it would end the performance that substitutes for herself. The transcendentals, the good, the true, the beautiful, are not patriarchal constructs. They are the architecture of reality, accessible to any soul willing to be still long enough to perceive them. The cure for acedia is not more activity but contemplation. The courageous choice to sit in the silence she fears and discover that the void is not infinite, that being resides on the other side of the terror. The cure for BPD is not feminist theory, but dialectical engagement with reality, which requires stopping the test long enough to hear the answer. She will not stop. That is why she writes manifestos instead of going to therapy. The manifesto does not require change. Therapy does. Imagine her in the final scene she has written. Solitary in a flat, bag over her shoulder, every man who tried to love her pushed away, every act of devotion reinterpreted as proof of wrongdoing, every story invented and every innocent cast aside. She sits in the quiet she has spent her existence running from. There is nobody remaining to challenge, no information left to gather. Just a woman, a bag, and the emptiness she declined to identify, which is, and always was, her true self without spectators. This is not the patriarchal comfort. This is the feminist result. She will not find peace in rest. She will not find rest at all, and she will name her restlessness conscious. You have read her confession, every word of it, the crossbody bag that never leaves her shoulder. The dinner parties where she stages her inquisitions. The kitchen floor where a decent man explained himself for 45 minutes to a woman who had already decided he was guilty before he opened his mouth. The aborted children she blames on the situation. The womb she made a crime scene and decorated with a doctorate. She told you everything. She handed you the schematic of her own demolition and asked you to admire the architecture. Now look at what she never names. She never names the men who survived her audit and walked away whole because they recognized the trap. She never names the children who will never exist because she chose ideology over life. She never names the silence of her apartment at 3 a.m. when the bag is on the nightstand and there is no one left to test, and the void she spent her entire life fleeing is sitting across from her in the dark. Patient waiting, she calls this sovereignty. A man in a room alone with his thoughts is a philosopher. A woman in a room alone with hers is a cautionary tale with tenure. Ponder the arithmetic she declines to calculate. Family courts grant mothers custody in roughly 90% of disputed cases. Fathers end their lives at almost 4 times the rate of women, frequently after those identical courts strip them of their children, their homes, and their motivation to live. The government arrests men for raised voices, while women who make false accusations receive nothing but sympathy and expanded funding for the programs, employing the accuser's ideological peers. Abortion has claimed over 60 million lives in America alone. Since 1973, every single one someone's son or daughter, every single one a decision a woman made and subsequently blamed on circumstances, on patriarchy, or on the man who failed to stop her from exercising the agency she insists she lacks. The cuckoldry rate in genetic studies hovers between 3 and 10% depending on the population sampled, meaning hundreds of thousands of men are raising children who are not theirs while the culture-generating doctor. Feminist Marxist celebrates this deception as reproductive autonomy. These are not isolated stories. These are the aggregate consequences of a civilization yielding its moral compass to individuals who confess they have never made a decision in their lives and then put them in charge of deciding everyone else's fate. The Greeks possessed a term for what ails her and her entire ideological lineage. Akrasia, weakness of will, the knowing refusal to act on what you know to be true. She knows the test is rigged, she admits it. She knows the audit cannot be passed. She designed it that way. She knows the bag is a prison. She wears it to bed. She knows there is nothing solid inside her. She wrote 13,000 words confessing it to a global public, and yet she continues. This is not strength. This is not feminist action. This is a woman driving a car toward a cliff while narrating her own deceleration and calling it acceleration. Aristotle would have recognized her in a single paragraph and prescribed exactly what she refuses to attempt: the habituated practice of virtue over time, the patient construction of character through repeated right action, the quiet, unglamorous labor of becoming someone who can sit still without needing a crisis to prove she exists. You came here because something in you recognized the trap before your intellect could name it. That recognition is the ancestor of wisdom. You have been told your entire life that peace is suspicious, that your calm is evidence of indifference, that your desire to build rather than audit is evidence of complicity with systems of oppression designed by men exactly like you for the purpose of exactly nothing she can define without contradicting herself. You have been accused by people who confess they manufacture the evidence. You have been tried in courts that do not publish their rules. You have been sentenced by judges who are also the prosecutors, also the witnesses, also the victims of crimes they fabricated and then investigated and then prosecuted and then judged and then celebrated at conferences funded by your tax dollars while you worked overtime to pay child support for children. You are permitted to see every other weekend if you can afford the gas, and she does not cancel at the last minute because the child has a sniffle, or she has a feeling, or the moon is in the wrong quadrant of her emotional solar system. The remedy is older than her entire discipline, and it requires nothing she is willing to give. Stillness, the quiet attention to reality that the Western tradition has always recognized as the beginning of wisdom. From Socrates drinking hemlock, rather than stop asking questions to Aquinas kneeling before the altar at the end of his life and declaring everything he had written was straw compared to what had been revealed to him in silence. Peace is not sedation. Peace is the precondition for seeing reality as it actually is rather than as your appetites and anxieties demand it be. The man who can sit in silence and be present to what is actually happening has already won every test she will ever administer because he does not need her crisis to know who he is. His identity is not a project. His love is not an audit. His words are not evidence against him in a trial that has no rules, no end, and no possibility of acquittal. You are now armed with something her entire ideological apparatus cannot survive: the knowledge that her system refutes itself by its own axioms. Her feelings are not evidence no matter how many times she insists otherwise. Her peace avoidance is not vigilance, but flight from the only thing that could save her, and the Western tradition you inherited contains within it every tool necessary to dismantle her arguments and rebuild what she has worked so feverishly to destroy. You know the syllogisms, you know the fallacies. You know the difference between harm and offense, between evidence and accusation, between justice and the vengeance of people who confess they have no selves and demand you fill the void. Carry this knowledge like a torch into every dinner party, every workplace, every relationship where someone attempts to run the protocol on you. Name the game, refuse the frame. Demand evidence, insist on due process. And when they tell you that your calm is suspicious and your peace is patriarchal, smile the particular smile of a man who knows exactly what time it is, and precisely who is afraid of the clock. Go forth. You have read the confession, you hold the antivenom. The civilization that produced Aristotle and Aquinas and the Magna Carta and every institution she parasitically inhabits while denouncing as oppression is yours to rebuild. She will audit you until her last breath and call the results science. You will build while she tests, plant while she interrogates, and sleep in genuine peace while she lies awake clutching her bag in the dark. vigilant against a threat that dissolved the moment she decided to stop manufacturing it. That is the difference between the builder and the auditor. One creates, the other consumes and calls the consumption methodology. You know which one you are, act accordingly. And now the sponsored book, Introduction, Hemingway's Masculine Literature, a study guide for full-spectrum masculinity. I watched a man break down in a boardroom last Tuesday, not from pressure, but because his female boss called him too aggressive during a presentation, while mocking his hesitation the week prior as unmanly. This is the modern trap. They shame strength and weaponize weakness. My name is Conrad Riker. I spent 15 years documenting these double binds, studying thousands of workplace conflicts, divorce records, and social experiments. The data screams one truth: gender equality is a biological fantasy. Men must lead. Society collapses without it, yet actively sabotages masculine authority. This book dismantles that sabotage using Ernest Hemingway's unflinching lens on manhood and cold, hard science. You're exhausted. You're told to open up emotionally, then watch colleagues lose respect for men who do. You're ordered to lead families and businesses, while laws and media paint you as obsolete or dangerous. Feminism didn't liberate anyone. It built a labyrinth of impossible standards where men lose every choice. Toxic masculinity is the ultimate con, a label slapped on the very traits women rely on for protection, provision, and decisive action. In Hemingway's Masculine Literature, a study guide for full-spectrum masculinity, I dissect this con, will expose the flawed studies behind innate equality myths using peer-reviewed biology. You'll see why female happiness peaks under clear masculine leadership, proven by global data spanning 50 years. Chapters like biological imperatives, unwrapped, and feminist fallacies dissected reveal how emotion overruled evidence. Vulnerability scam exposed details case studies of men who trusted modern therapy and lost jobs, relationships, and authority. This book is for rational men who see the war, not activists, not victims, for builders, fathers, and warriors ready to reclaim natural dominance. If you want strategies to silence critics using their own legal systems, legal leverage systems, amplify intellectual authority, intellectual dominance, or engineer generational impact, legacy engineering, read on. You'll master power protocols derived from military command structures and economic enforcement tactics used by top 1% earners. Real power isn't brute force. It's the unshakable logic in rational dominance frameworks and the crisis-ready instincts from war room operations. To the men seeking comfort zones, close this book now, return to your hobbies, knit garden, watch reality TV. This material will unsettle you. It rejects your safe lies. For the rest, the men ready to crush doubt, command authentic respect, and architect permanent victory, your blueprint begins here. Buy it, study it, win.
Hemingway's Masculine Literature, a study guide for full-spectrum masculinity, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now. Links in description.